All right, so to the questions that you all are probably looking to ask regarding the final exam. So I want you to finish the fourth exam before you start asking questions about the final exam because you need to focus on the fourth exam because you don't pass the fourth exam, you can't pass the final exam. So, final exam. Um, 30 questions, multiple choice. You'll have an hour and 50 minutes to take it. It is a timed exam. You may take it at any point during the finals week. So if you look in the syllabus, it'll give you the actual date range. That said, it doesn't end at midnight on the last day of exams. It ends at 5 o'clock. This is a hard number. 5 o'clock is when the school officially closes for the semester. We have 24 hours to submit our grades. So if you say, oh, I was going to start it, but I got held up, nothing I can do with you. At 5 o'clock, we have to cut you off. There is no extensions that can be granted beyond the 5 o'clock of the last day of the exams. Now, another comment on the date of the exams. So what's going to happen is I think Wednesday of next week is the last day of instruction of the semester, and then Thursday marks the start of the exams. You need to check the syllabus to be sure. But what I'm going to do Wednesday night, your homework is due. There are only, I think, 60 questions associated with this homework set. It's much shorter. I'm going to cut you off that night of Wednesday, start of exams. I'm going to compile the homework grades. I'm going to compile the discussion board questions. You have until Wednesday at midnight next week to answer all the discussion board questions you haven't answered. At that point, it all gets compiled, and so the only outstanding grade you have is your final exam. Now, you can take the final exam during any point during that window, but that said, the day after exam, my grades are due. I have to submit them by 5 o'clock, preferably earlier because our servers really cannot handle all the instructors submitting their grades at once. So what I will probably do is that if I have a section where everyone has taken their exam, I'll probably go ahead and submit the grades to make sure that they get through to the server. So if we're about halfway through exams and you take the final exam and you're like, well, I didn't get the grade I want the course, I want to talk about improving my grade, that would be the time to ask it. But if you wait until the last day of exams and you take the exam and go, I really think I should have gotten a better grade in the class, I'm not going to have the time to discuss it with you because my grades are due. I have to submit them. So my advice would be go ahead and knock this final out of the way. This way, if there's an issue or you're like a couple points away from a higher letter grade, we have time to discuss possibilities of maybe regrading an old assignment. But if you ask me the last day of exams, like, hey, can I talk about my grade? The answer is going to be no. And the answer is going to be no because I have to make sure all the paperwork gets submitted on time. It's not just your exam grades, it's also your grades for the course, it's also the final attendance. It's also making sure that everything made it through the server, so I have to go back and check an hour later to make sure everything is stuck. But again, the final exam, it's cumulative. If you're curious what's going to be on the final exam, if you go to the syllabus, open it up. For Chem 251, there are 31 SLOs, student learning outcomes listed in the syllabus. There will be a question associated with each of those SLOs. For Organic 2, 252, if you go through, I think there's like 38 SLOs. I did 30 questions, so that gives you an idea that some of the material isn't covered on there. That said, these exams are going to lean heavily towards earlier material. So the alkynes and the ethers that show up for 251, you've only got 2 or 3 questions on those. When it comes to properties of amino acids, carbohydrates, lipids, all that, there's going to be like 5 to 7 questions about that in the 252 exam, but most of it's going to lean heavier to earlier material. Now, hopefully at this point, you're also seeing a lot of this material builds on itself as well. So if you've taken all the exams this semester, you should be sitting pretty well for the final exam. You really don't have that much to worry about. For this week, do not forget that you have a lab practical that you are taking. This is a completely solo lab practical. You're going to walk in. I may give you some pointers about timing in terms of where you should be at the point of the class and how to dispose of the waste. But other than that, all I am doing is observing this week for your practical. You do not get to work with anyone else. It's just you by yourself. Obviously, communicate with each other if you're moving around the room. But as far as saying, hey, how do I do this? How do I do this? No, you don't get to do that. The point of this final is practical is to demonstrate that you are self-sufficient in the lab. So, practical this week, make sure you show up on time. We're going to start hard at 8 and 2 o'clock to make sure that there's plenty of time to do the practical. You are in charge of setting everything up, running the experiment, taking it all down, doing the characterization, and doing the analysis. You have to complete it in 2 hours and 50 minutes. There's nothing to be submitted online after lab. What you finish in lab is what you have. I'm going to be walking around. I have the rubrics in hand. So if you are curious what you got, you can see the rubric before you head out. I would ask that you do it then. If you want me to send you the rubric after you left lab, it gets a bit more complicated. We're not allowed to send you grades directly through email so we can talk qualitatively. But if you want to see what the actual marks are, there's some paperwork you're going to have to fill out to make that happen. Also, what I'm going to do while you're taking your practical, do the final checks in the lab notebook. So the table of contents needs to be in there. You need to have the pre-lab for the lab practical and the post-lab for the previous lab that you did for the extra credit lab. While you're taking your practical, odds are what I'm going to do is I'm going to start tallying up all the points in the lab notebooks and post those grades as well. So by the end of this week, your lab grade will be completely filled out. So you will know what your lab grade is in the course. That just leaves the homework as the only outstanding grade other than the final exam. And so when you take your final exam, the remaining 22% of the course, that's all that's left. So if you got any questions about the practical, any questions about how the final exam is going to work, feel free to shoot me an email, ask me questions during live streams. But at this point, we're kind of wrapping up. I was checking on my end of YouTube today. There's only 5 more live streams left to go. So we're kind of closing it out at this point. All right, I need to answer a few comments I'm getting in Teams on an unrelated comment, and then I'm here to answer any questions you might have. last week's discussion board. So for last week's discussion board, you started with methyl cyclohexane, and you had a handful of reactions you worked through. The first was reaction of light and Cl2 with an equivalent of chlorine. You had strong base, I think it was tert-butoxide. You had the addition of a second halogen, and then you had tert-butoxide again. So this is kind of a refresher of how stuff from the beginning of the semester, particularly as, actually this is kind of finishing up with the alkanes, but it's also kind of a refresher from the beginning of the semester. So first product here is going to be your methyl chlorocyclohexane. Your first elimination here is going to give you 1 methyl cyclohexene. Your addition will give you the trans 1,2-dibromo 1-methyl cyclohexane, and your last one here is going to give you kind of a weird one. It's 1,3. So it's 2-methyl 1,3 cyclopentadiene. And for the discussion board, what you did was you reacted this compound with this compound. Now, Sam had asked, are 2 of these two, because it tells you that 4 of them are actually products, and she asked, like, well, are there really only 2 up there? Yes. Some of them are done twice just to make sure you're paying attention. This is the Diels-Alder reaction. So we have a diene and we have a dienophile. And our final product is going to be some cyclohexene, 1 cyclohexene that's formed out of it. Now, your diene here is going to be the one that contains, between the 2 double bonds, that double bond there. So we're going to number these 1, 2, 3. Oops, sorry. The way I teach Diels-Alder is you start with the first part of the diene, 1, 2, 3, 4. This will give you 1, 2, 3, 4. We have a methyl group attached to the 3rd carbon, so we're going to put a group there. And then for our dienophile, the opposite 2 carbons are the alpha-beta carbons. So we have a methyl group attached, and then we have a cyclohexene ring. Now, these don't necessarily have to attach on the same side, so we can have a variance where this group is down, this group is up, this group is down, this group is up, and then one where they're both down. But if they're both down, that's just rotated by there's just a mirror plane, there's a flip there. But you're going to get, in principle, 4 possibilities here, and that's why I gave you 4 on the discussion board. Now, what I didn't realize when I copied over the discussion board, because there's a comment asking you to respond to my discussion board post, and it didn't copy over the discussion board post I had in the development shell. So let's take a look at 2 things. Because this is a nice idealized reaction, but there is a massive issue with the Diels-Alder product. So let's just pick one of our Diels-Alder products. Well, this is still a diene, or this is still a dienophile. So if we still had this 2-methyl 1,3 cyclohexadiene, this can further react with this compound to give you this, with iterations of this being both up and down. And this can attach to this to add another link, and so forth. So the comment on the discussion board is that, well, comment that was supposed to be up on the discussion board but didn't get copied over from the development shell, was you end up acquiring this like really heavy hydrocarbon when you're done. What could be the source of it? The problem with Diels-Alder chemistry is that you have to keep the concentrations really low. Because what you don't want are you don't want your product reacting with the diene that you've already got in the reactor. Now, there are ways of stopping this mechanistically. Basically, if you make this really electron donating, it's not as likely to be seeking out the diene. Whereas if you have like a nitro group or a sulfur group or an alcohol that pull electron density off, that tends to promote the reaction. But regardless, you always tend to end up with higher products when you get done. And this can actually react with itself. So let's say we just had two of these molecules together. Well, this part could attack this part, and so we would still have our cyclohexene, and we'd have the ring coming off there, but we would also end up with this compound here as well. So in addition to reacting with product 2 and 4 and forming what we meant those two cyclic rings, we can get all types of side products as well. So again, that was meant to be the discussion board, but since it obviously didn't get copied over, I just gave you the 2 points if you answer the discussion board question. But yeah, that was the discussion board for last week. You too, and I'll see you actually tomorrow. right, so not a lot of people out here today, so we'll just go ahead and close up the live stream. Again, if you got any questions, feel free to email me in advance. And otherwise, I've got 3 more live streams this week, and I think just 2 more next week. So I will see you all for the practical this week.